I didn't say a word when he told me to go sit in the den. I just stood there, holding the dish towel I'd been using to dry my good china. The china my late husband Gerald bought me for our 30th anniversary, and I looked at my son-in-law standing in the doorway of my own dining room like he owned it, like he'd paid a single bill in this house, like his name was on the deed that was sitting in my fireproof safe upstairs. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just turned around, folded the towel, set it on the counter, and walked to the den. And that night, sitting in the dark in the house I'd lived in for 26 years, I made a decision. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this really started, because I think a lot of you are going to recognize pieces of this story. Maybe more pieces than you'd like to admit. My name is Loretta. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as an administrative coordinator at a hospital system in Columbus, Ohio, and when I retired 3 years ago, I had a paid-off house, a pension, Gerald's life insurance, and what I thought was a good relationship with my only daughter, Celeste. Gerald passed 7 years ago, colon cancer, very fast, 61 years old and gone in 8 months. After he died, it was just me in this house, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a backyard Gerald had spent 15 years landscaping exactly the way he wanted it, Japanese maple in the corner, raised garden beds along the back fence. A stone path he laid himself, 1 weekend at a time over 3 summers. I kept everything exactly the way he left it. Celeste lived about 40 minutes away with her husband, a man named Todd. They'd been married 5 years when all of this started. Todd worked in logistics. Celeste did marketing for a dental group. They had a son together, my grandson Eli, who was 3 at the time. I want to be careful about how I describe Todd, because I know how these things can sound. I'm not saying he was a bad person from the beginning. I'm saying I didn't know who he was until I gave him access to my home, and by then I'd already made every mistake I was going to make. It started with a leak. Celeste called me on a Tuesday in February, 2 winters ago now, and told me their apartment had a burst pipe and water damage in the bedroom and the living room. The property management company was saying repairs could take 4 to 6 weeks. Eli was sleeping on a cot in the hallway. Todd's mother was too far away to help. They needed somewhere to go. I said yes before she finished asking. Of course I did. That's my daughter. That's my grandson. I wasn't going to tell them to find a hotel for 6 weeks when I had 3 empty bedrooms sitting unused. Just the guest suite, I told Celeste. The one with the attached bath. Eli can have the little room next to it. She thanked me and she cried a little, and she said, "Mom, I don't know what we'd do without you." I believed her. They arrived on a Friday evening with a U-Haul trailer full of stuff I hadn't expected. Furniture, boxes stacked to the ceiling, a huge sectional sofa that ended up in my garage because it wouldn't fit anywhere else. Todd carried things in without asking where they went. He put a box of his tools in my laundry room. He hung his jacket on the coat by my front door, the one where Gerald's old Carhartt used to hang until I finally put it away last year. I told myself it was fine. It was only 6 weeks. The first month wasn't terrible. Noisy, yes. Different, yes. My routine was completely disrupted. But I reminded myself what it meant to have family close. I reminded myself that little Eli's laugh in the mornings was a gift. Then the 6 weeks passed. The apartment repairs kept getting delayed. The property management company was unresponsive. Todd said they were considering their legal options. Celeste said they'd looked at a few places, but nothing was in their budget yet. I said they could stay a little longer. I said that. I offered, because at that point I still thought we were all on the same team. The first thing Todd moved without asking was the armchair in the living room. It was a wing-back chair, burgundy, that Gerald had picked out himself. Todd said it was blocking the flow and moved it to the corner. When I moved it back, he moved it again 2 days later without saying anything. I mentioned it to Celeste. She said, "Mom, he just likes things a certain way. He's not trying to be disrespectful." She said it gently, apologetically, and I let it go. That was my first mistake. The second thing was the kitchen. I keep my kitchen very organized. I know where everything is. I've had the same system for 20 years. About 6 weeks into their stay, I came downstairs one morning and found that Todd had rearranged the lower cabinets while I was sleeping. He'd moved my cast iron skillets to the cabinet above the stove, put my mixing bowls where the pots used to be, and reorganized the pantry so that his protein powder and Eli's snacks took up an entire shelf that used to hold my canned goods. When I asked him about it, he said, "I was just trying to make it more functional." I stood there in my kitchen, in my house at 62 years old, and I said, "I'd appreciate it if you asked me before you rearrange anything." He looked at me for a moment, just a moment, and then he said, "Sure, Loretta, not Mrs. Harmon, not Mum. Loretta," like I was a co-worker he was tolerating. I started keeping a small notebook in my nightstand, just writing things down, dates, incidents. Not because I knew what I'd need it for yet. I just had a feeling I might need it for something. By month 3, I was sleeping in the guest room. I want you to understand how that happened, because I didn't just hand over my bedroom. It was Celeste who asked. She came to me on a Sunday morning looking exhausted and said that Eli had been waking up at night and coming to their bed, and with Todd's work schedule the way it was, they weren't getting any sleep, and the guest suite had more space for Eli's things, and would I mind if they switched rooms? Just temporarily. I said yes, and I moved my clothes to the guest room, and I told myself it was temporary, and I watched my daughter move into the bedroom where her father and I had slept for 26 years, and I did not say a single word about how it made me feel. That was my second mistake, and the biggest one. Because once you give up the bedroom, you've communicated something to people like Todd. You've told them exactly where your limits are. And his response was to test whether there were any limits left at all. The requests came faster after that. Could they rearrange the den so Eli had a play area? Could Todd park his truck in the garage instead of the street? Could they get a second key made for Celeste's sister, who was coming to visit? Could I adjust when I did my laundry because it conflicted with Eli's nap schedule? Each one was small. Each one was reasonable sounding in isolation, but I was starting to feel like a guest in my own home. I'd walk into a room and find it rearranged. I'd reach for something in the kitchen and it would be somewhere else. I'd come home from my water aerobics class on Tuesday mornings and find Todd's friends sitting in my living room watching football, and he wouldn't even get up to introduce me. I kept writing in my notebook. Then Todd started talking about money. It was casual at first. He'd mention that things were tight with the extra expenses of the displacement. He'd say something like, "Utilities must be brutal with all of us here," and look at me like that was a question. He said once, very offhand, "Celeste mentioned you're pretty comfortable since Gerald's policy paid out." That sentence made something cold move through me. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and left the room. A week later, Celeste came to me and asked if I could help them with their car insurance. They were 3 months behind. I'd been helping with groceries, incidentally. Not because anyone asked me directly at first, just because I bought food and they ate it. But this was different. This was a bill. I paid it, $840. The month after that, it was Eli's daycare. Todd had switched jobs and there was a gap in coverage, $1,200. After that, it was a credit card. Just to make the minimum, $300. I paid all of it because it was Celeste and it was Eli, and I kept thinking about what Gerald would have done, and Gerald would have helped his family. Gerald would have given them whatever they needed. What I forgot was that Gerald also would have sat Todd down and had a very direct conversation at about month 2. Gerald had planted a rose of Sharon bush along the back fence the spring before he got sick. It wasn't as dramatic as some things. It wasn't a giant old tree or a garden he'd spent decades on. But it was his. He picked it out at the nursery, dug the hole himself, staked it carefully. It had grown beautifully over the years, tall and full, and in the summer it bloomed this deep lavender pink that you could see from the kitchen window. Todd had it cut down on a Thursday while I was at my doctor's appointment. He said it was blocking light to the lawn, and he was trying to improve the grass situation. He said it as though he was doing me a favor, as though it was his lawn to improve. I came home and stood at the kitchen window, and where the rose of Sharon had been there was a stump and a pile of branches, and I felt something just break. Very quietly. Very completely. I went upstairs to the guest room that used to be my room, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I thought about Gerald standing in that backyard with a shovel, happy as I'd ever seen him, talking about how it would look in 5 years. I thought, this is my house, these are my things, this is my life, and I thought, I have been a fool. But I do not have to keep being one. The dinner was the following Saturday. Todd had invited people over, his brother and sister-in-law, 2 couples from his work, a total of 8 additional people in my house for dinner. He hadn't asked me. He'd told Celeste, who told me the day before, and I'd spent that Friday running to the grocery store and cleaning the house and preparing a pot roast and 2 side dishes because I honestly thought that this was a family dinner that I was part of. I'd set the table with my good china. When the guests arrived, Todd introduced them to Celeste, to Eli, to the couples he knew. He introduced me as Celeste's mom, not as the homeowner, not as Loretta. Celeste's mom, like I was an accessory. I sat down at my own dining room table, at what used to be my seat at the head of the table, and Todd looked at me and said, in front of everyone, "Oh, you don't have to sit in here, Loretta. You can eat in the den. We need the space." Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. His colleagues were looking at their phones or at the centerpiece. Celeste looked at her plate. I want to tell you that I said something cutting and brilliant right then. I didn't. I sat there for about 3 seconds, and I felt every eye in the room on me, and I thought about my good china on that table, and Gerald's anniversary gift, and the rose of Sharon stump in my backyard. And I stood up very slowly, and I took my plate, and I walked to the den. I did not eat. I sat in the dark, and I made my plan. Sunday morning I got up at 6. I went downstairs, made myself a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. I looked at every entry. Dates going back 8 months. Rearranged furniture. Money paid. Requests accommodated. The bedroom. The rosebush. The dinner. Then I made some calls. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia, not a family friend, a real estate and estate attorney I'd used when Gerald passed. I called her cell phone on a Sunday morning and left a message explaining the situation. She called me back within the hour. I called my bank and had a conversation about my accounts. I called a locksmith. And I called my friend Wanda, who'd been telling me for 6 months that I needed to do something, and I asked her if I could stay with her for a few days while I handled the situation. She said, "Baby, I've been waiting for this call." My attorney explained that because Celeste and Todd had been living in the home for more than 30 days, they had established tenancy under Ohio law, which meant I couldn't simply ask them to leave and expect them to be gone by Tuesday. I needed to go through proper notice procedures. I want to be honest about this part because I think it's important. The legal process was not fast. It was not satisfying in the way I wanted it to be in that moment. There were forms and timelines, and I had to be patient in a way that was genuinely hard for me. I gave proper written notice as my attorney instructed. 30 days. During those 30 days I stayed at Wander's. I changed the beneficiary designations on my accounts. I gathered documentation, my notebook, bank records, receipts. My attorney had advised me to do this because what Todd had done, accepting money from me repeatedly without any formal agreement and while living in my home rent-free, created a situation that had legal dimensions beyond just tenancy. Todd tried to call me 4 times. I didn't answer. Celeste called me crying and said she didn't know it had gotten this bad, that she was sorry, that she loved me. I told her I loved her too. I told her she had 30 days to find alternative housing, and I would help her with the security deposit on a new apartment if she needed it. I told her Eli was welcome at my house any time she wanted to bring him. I told her this was not about her and me. I meant all of it. The 30 days ended on a Wednesday. By then Celeste and Eli had moved into an apartment across town. She'd actually called me 3 times during the process, not to argue but to ask for help. Packing, finding a pediatrician near the new place, borrowing my SUV for the move. I helped her every time. I wanted her to know the door between us was still open, even if the door to my house was not. Todd was the problem. He refused to accept that the notice applied to him. He told Celeste I couldn't make him leave. He called my attorney's office twice to discuss the situation. My attorney did not engage. On the 31st day, with law enforcement present as my attorney had arranged, Todd left my house. He took some things that weren't his, some tools from the garage, a portable speaker I'd bought, a set of luggage Gerald had given me. I had documentation of all of it. My attorney filed a civil claim. The case settled 14 months later. Between the damage to the property, he had repainted 2 rooms without my permission, removed shelving in the garage, replaced my bathroom fixtures without consulting me, and the property Todd had taken, the settlement came to a little over $9,000. Not the kind of number that makes headlines, but it was mine, and getting it mattered. The first morning I woke up back in my own bedroom, I lay there for a long time before I got up. I could hear the neighborhood the way I used to. Birds in the backyard, the mail truck a few streets over, the particular quality of quiet that this house has when it's just mine. I'd missed that quiet so much I hadn't even known how much until it came back. I went downstairs and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at Gerald's backyard. The rose of Sharon's stump was still there. I hadn't had it removed yet. I'd been thinking about what to plant instead, something that would grow tall and bloom in summer and be mine to tend. I found a gardening centre about 20 minutes away that carried rows of Sharons. I bought 2. I planted them on the same afternoon, in the same spot, using the same kind of stakes Gerald had used. It's not the same, I know that. The original was Gerald's, not mine, and nothing I plant is going to change that. But it's mine now, and it's growing. I want to say something directly to anyone who sees themselves in this story, because I know some of you will. I know because the thing I hear most from people in situations like mine is some version of, I don't know how it got this far. I know how it got that far. It got that far because you love your child. Because love is not a strategy. Because every individual request sounded reasonable in the moment and you were focused on the relationship rather than the pattern. Because the people who take advantage of generous people are very good at taking one thing at a time. I am not ashamed of having loved my daughter without conditions. I am not ashamed of wanting to help my family. What I will carry forward is this: my home is not a resource. It is where I live. It is where Gerald and I built our life together. Welcoming people into it is a gift I give. And like any gift, it can only be given freely, not extracted, not occupied, not assumed. The day Todd told me to go eat in the den, he thought he was diminishing me. What he actually did was remind me of exactly who I am and what I'm willing to protect. I am Loretta Harmon. This is my house, and I am done being easy to dismiss. If you're going through something like this right now, here's what I want you to hear. First, document everything. Dates, amounts, what was moved, what was said. You don't have to know yet why you're keeping records. Just keep them. Second, talk to an attorney before you think you need one. I waited 8 months when I could have called after 2. The law has procedures and they take time, and the sooner you start, the sooner you're on the other side. Third, your home is yours. Not because you're being selfish, because it is legally, morally, and in every practical sense yours. Loving your family does not mean forfeiting the place you live. I'm doing fine now. Celeste and I talk on the phone most Sundays. Ely spent a weekend here last month, and we made pancakes and watched movies, and he fell asleep on the couch with his shoes still on, and I covered him with the blanket from my hall closet, and I sat in the armchair, Gerald's armchair, back where it belongs, and I watched him sleep. That's what this house is for. That's what I was protecting all along. I've thought a lot about what I would do differently, and honestly not as much as you might expect. Not because I have no regrets. I have plenty. I wish I'd called my attorney in month 2 instead of month 8. I wish I'd kept my bedroom. I wish I'd said out loud from the very first week, this is temporary and here are the boundaries. Those are real mistakes and I own them. But the part where I said yes to my daughter when she was standing in the rain with a toddler and a U-Haul, I'd do that again. Because that's who I am. And I've stopped treating my own generosity like a character flaw. What I've come to understand is that what happened in my home wasn't just about Todd being a difficult person. It was about a pattern, the way one small concession becomes the ceiling for the next request, and the next, until you look up one day and realize you've been moved out of your own life inch by inch. Nobody does that to you in one dramatic moment. They do it gradually, and they count on you being too reasonable, too loving, too conflict-averse to call it what it is while it's happening. That's what I mean when I say I wish I'd seen the pattern earlier. Not the individual incidents. I saw those. I noted every one of them in my little green notebook. What I didn't see, or didn't want to see, was what they added up to. There's something that happens to people who have spent their lives being the person others lean on. You start to confuse endurance with strength. You tell yourself that absorbing someone else's behavior without complaint is the high road, when sometimes it's just the road that gets you walked on. Real strength, the kind I had to learn in my 60s, is knowing the difference between patience and self-erasure. Celeste is my daughter and I love her without conditions. That is never going to change. But love without honesty isn't actually love. It's just comfort. And the most loving thing I could have done for her, earlier, was to say clearly, this is not working. These are my limits, and I need you to choose differently. I waited too long to say it. When I finally did, she heard me. That tells me she was always capable of hearing it. I just had to be willing to say it. As for Todd, I don't carry anger about him anymore. Anger takes maintenance and I have a garden to tend. What he did had consequences, and those consequences came without me having to raise my voice or lose my dignity. That's the thing about standing on solid ground. You don't have to shout. You just have to stay standing. The rose of Sharon I planted is about 18 inches tall now. It'll be a few years before it blooms the way Gerald's did. That's fine. I'm not in a hurry. I've learned that most things worth having take longer than you think they should, and grow stronger for it. This house is mine, my peace is mine. And neither of those things is available for gradual occupation by someone who doesn't value them. I'm Loretta Harmon, and I'm not easy to dismiss anymore.